One of the really nice things about being a Jane Austen fan is that no matter how unreliable and disappointing modern stories can get, you can always pick up one of Jane's novels and immerse yourself in a world that won't let you down. Jane Austen understood the female hero. She understood that heroism, it's not about power, it's about character. And I think this needs pointing out right now more than ever, since Hollywood seems committed to this crazy fad of creating heroines that most of us can't relate to and many of us just straight up don't like. When it comes to modern story writing, particularly on screen, the female hero is not faring too well. She's gotten caught up in this vortex of ideology based on a misunderstanding of what female empowerment truly is. There are certain things that a character must go through in order to be heroic, and I can't tell if modern story writers just don't get that or they think we women actually can't do it. Too often, the modern female hero is magically good at everything, particularly those things that men are usually good at. She's generally smarter than the men in her story and often relishes needling those inferior men with her advanced wit. To be blunt, she's overpowered and arrogant. If she has to struggle, it's usually because everyone around her is presented as unrealistically inferior, and they just don't get how great she is. It's kind of boring, and to be honest, insulting. Real heroes don't act like these modern caricatures. Real heroes aren't arrogant, or if they are, they have to learn that their behavior and/or mindset is a problem in order for them to be an actual hero. And that's why I want to talk about Emma. She's a great example of a powerful female hero with a solid character arc. She has, as Austen points out in the beginning, a disposition to think a little too well of herself. And this is basically a nice way of saying that she can sometimes be a bit arrogant. She's charmingly arrogant, but arrogant nonetheless. But if there's one thing an Austen heroine can do, it's to find her faults and do her best to transform herself into a better person. And that's what makes Emma heroic. Today I will mostly be talking about the book version of Emma, but I'll be using footage from both the 1996 and 2020 film versions. These two films are actually the only two adaptations of Emma I've ever seen. If anyone thinks there's another worth watching, please let me know in the comments. Emma has the distinction of being Austen's only main character with actual power. Now, by power, I mean that she has resources that allow her to have power over not only herself, but others. All of Austen's heroines have strengths, particularly of character, but only Emma has societal power. Now, she is no superhero with extraordinary powers, but considering the type of story and the setting, she's a very powerful young woman. Modern story writers looking to create a good female superhero would do well to look at how Austen crafted Emma, and this is because it doesn't matter if the power a hero has is from wealth, status, or some kind of magical superhuman ability. The character development is the same. Things play out on a different scale, but the hero's character journey is the same. Austen lets us know from the first sentence that her heroine has it all. Emma Woodhouse, handsome, clever, and rich, with a comfortable home and happy disposition, seem to unite some of the best blessings of existence. She's so financially comfortable that she has the luxury of even going through a phase, at a time of life when most young ladies are daydreaming about their future husbands, of determining that she would never marry. And when her young friend Harriet remarks with horror that she will be an old maid, Emma replies, "I shall not be a poor old maid, and it is poverty only which makes celibacy contemptible to a generous public. A single woman with a very narrow income must be a ridiculous, disagreeable old maid, the proper sport of boys and girls, but a single woman of good fortune is always respectable." And this is an extraordinary thing that highlights not only the disparity between her situation and her young protégée Harriet, but also between her and all of Austen's other heroines. Emma is the only one who is not reliant on love to lift her out of poverty or dependence on a bad family situation. For Emma, her biggest obstacle will be herself. This is important, as this is the most essential component of any powerful hero's story. The powerful hero must recognize that their power comes with the responsibility to use that power wisely. To do this, they must be willing to be introspective enough to see their own flaws and endeavor to improve. In a previous video about Netflix adaptation of Persuasion, I mentioned that Jane Austen created two types of heroines in her 6 finished novels, and that's the flawed and the virtuous. I call a character a virtuous hero if he or she holds strong to their principles no matter how hard this makes things for them. And I call a hero flawed if he or she has to discover an error in their judgment or a flaw in their character in order to achieve their goals. Now, no, all humans are inherently flawed. I just use the terms flawed and virtuous as it relates to the hero's arc in a story. So Emma is a flawed heroine. A big part of her journey is about discovering that even though she has it all, she needs to maintain humility for her own sake, as well as for those who rely on her. And we see this play out very clearly in her relationship with her young friend Harriet Smith. Now, Harriet is a pretty simple girl. She's kind and genuine and very impressionable. She's also pretty powerless in society. She's the opposite of Emma, where Emma is a member of the most prominent family in the neighborhood and essentially in charge of her own house. Harriet lives in a boarding school, and she doesn't even know who her parents are. And so Emma decides to become a kind of mentor to her. But what she doesn't see is that she is essentially just trifling in another person's life to appease her own vanity. We know this because she has always had the opportunity to be of service to Jane Fairfax, a local girl who is in many respects just as powerless as Harriet. But Emma passes over Jane and chooses to lavish her attentions on Harriet. Emma feels fully superior to Harriet. She is jealous of Jane's beauty and talent and the way the community admires her despite her having no wealth or status. Jane is admired because of who she is as a person, not because of her situation in life. And probably most importantly, Jane shows what it looks like when one applies herself diligently to her art. Emma struggles with this. She struggles to stay motivated to apply herself to her studies and arts. She has many unfinished books and drawings and hobbies. This is something many of us can relate to. I'm an artist. I love to oil paint, so I know a lot about this. It's easy to catch a whiff of inspiration, start something, and then trail off when it gets hard or boring, or when my mind just darts like a guppy off to some other sparkly lure. It's pretty hard to stay on track, particularly if it's something you actually don't have to do. This tendency is particularly true for some highly intelligent people who can pick up concepts easily. They get used to not having to apply themselves, so when things get a little hard, they might just move on to something else they can pick up quickly and feel good at. And so Emma takes on Harriet, and one really cool thing that Austen does is she expands what's wrong with Emma's relationship with Harriet into the relationship of Mrs. Elton and Jane Fairfax. Mrs. Elton decides to become a mentor to Jane in just the same way that Emma had done with Harriet, and she's so invasive and meddlesome that she stands as a personification of the negative aspect of Emma's desire to be a patroness. Now, there are positive aspects there as well, but Mrs. Elton represents what's negative. It's that thing where someone wants to be the good person that everyone admires for being a good person, but a good person just does good things. They don't set themselves up for being adored as the patron saint of goodness. A good person, or hero, doesn't just do good out of boredom and ego. She does good when it's hard and inconvenient, which is what Emma ends up doing in the end. But before she gets there, we see Emma project a bit about Mrs. Elton. Emma could see that Mrs. Elton had a little beauty and a little accomplishment, but so little judgment that she thought herself coming with superior knowledge of the world. And so Emma can see that Mrs. Elton is arrogant and presumptuous the way she moves into the neighborhood and tries to be the queen of society. But Emma can't yet see that she has a bit of that going on in herself. She's a very young woman, but she thinks she knows enough to be the leader of the neighborhood. Now, her position and status make her the de facto leader, but her age and inexperience make her unprepared. Emma has the arrogance of youth. And because she's relatively isolated, therefore inexperienced in the world, and unmatched for intelligence in her family, she comes to think that she knows more than all those around her. She hasn't come to understand the old adage, the more I learn, the more I realize how much I don't know. And since she is both young and powerful, she's in a prime position to be prone to arrogance. Now this makes me think of the character of Thor in the 2011 film. I just love that movie, so I bring it up from time to time. It not only has a great hero's journey, but it also stars Chris Hemsworth. Who doesn't love him? Anyway, the movie starts with Thor about to take over his father's throne to become king, but he is vain and arrogant, and his father Odin recognizes that Thor is not ready. He strips him of his powers and exiles him to Earth. Through the course of the film, Thor is humbled by his experience and learns to value life in a new way. This gives him better insight into how to use his extraordinary gifts wisely and in service of his people. And through that humility, he becomes a responsible hero with power worthy to be king. Now, at a fundamental level, it's essentially the same message in Emma. She can use her power in society for good or ill, and since she is the one with power, she's the one who must recognize this and take responsibility for it. Heroes with power who struggle with arrogance must come to empathize with those they have power over. If they don't learn this, they can do great harm without even knowing it. In the case of Thor, his father had to strip him of his godlike powers in order for Thor to be reduced to the level of those he has power over, so that he could see what it's like and learn to empathize. This taught him humility. Now, Emma isn't as arrogant as Thor. She just needs more of a nudge rather than a major life catastrophe in order to help her recognize what's going on. She already has a lot of empathy, she's just gotten a little lost. A big part of what helps Emma get herself back on track is her love and respect for Mr. Knightley. She looks to him as the ideal gentleman. He's one of Austen's few virtuous male heroes, and he exemplifies the qualities that Emma needs in order to be heroic herself. He is wise and gracefully principled. He is there to remind her of what is right when she begins to stray. She needs this because she never got that guidance from her lovable but weak and out-of-touch father. Mrs. Weston, her governess, was a good teacher who helped foster Emma's good principles, but she was no match for Emma's intellect, and a person's ability to rationalize themselves into bad behavior is as smart as she is. Most people have undesirable emotions and impulses. It's what we do with these emotions and impulses that matters in the end. So Mr. Knightley stands as a sort of model of a virtuous path. Therefore, Frank Churchill represents a less desirable path. He brings out those things about Emma that she's been repressing and she is tempted to indulge in. And to be fair, to a certain degree, she brings those qualities out in him too. Emma can tell that there's something not right about her relationship with Frank Churchill. Austen writes, "She doubted whether she had not transgressed the duty of woman by woman in betraying her suspicions of Jane Fairfax's feelings to Frank Churchill. It was hardly right, but it had been so strong an idea that it would escape her, and his submission to all that she told was a compliment to her penetration, which made it difficult for her to be quite certain that she ought not to have held her tongue." Here we see that Emma, who started an unflattering, scandalous rumor about Jane based off of nothing more than fancy and an active imagination, can see that maybe that wasn't a good or proper thing to do. But since Frank took up her idea positively, it gratifies her vanity, and then her flattered ego keeps her from setting herself straight. If she had whispered the same idea to Mr. Knightley, she would have gotten a very different response. There are moments where Emma loses her footing, and it appears that her negative traits of jealousy, vanity, and conceit will prevail. There's that amazing scene where Emma mocks Mrs. Bates at the picnic party at Box Hill, where Frank Churchill is in a mischievous mood and gets Emma to play along with him, poking fun at the rest of the party. It's a scene I always brace for because Emma's behavior is so cringy, and I remember being young and arrogant at times myself. I know I've lost my own footing at times in life, and the results are so embarrassing. It's never worth it to be petty with your wit. In this scene, Frank demands that everyone tell Emma something very clever, or 2 things moderately clever, or 3 things very dull indeed. To which Miss Bates, the lovable but rather tiresome older woman who doesn't have much of a filter between her thoughts and her tongue, replies in a good-natured way, "That will just do for me. I shall be sure to say 3 dull things as soon as ever I open my mouth." But Emma, who's emboldened by Frank's mocking behavior, cannot resist and blurts out, "Ah, ma'am, but there may be a difficulty. Pardon me, but you will be limited to number, only 3 at once." And this lands fine at first because Miss Bates is not used to Emma being unrestrained and mean, but it soon registers, and anyone with eyes can see that it hurts her. It's one thing when a sharp wit like Elizabeth Bennet's takes an arrogant bully down a peg, but it's entirely different when someone punches down. Mr. Knightley calls Emma out on her bad behavior, but Emma insists that she was justified in her comment to Miss Bates since what is good and what is ridiculous are most unfortunately blended in her. Knightley agrees, but counters, were she, Miss Bates, prosperous, I could allow much for the occasional prevalence of the ridiculous over the good. Were she a woman of fortune, I would leave every harmless absurdity to take its chance. But she is poor. She has sunk from the comforts she was born to. Her situation should secure your compassion. And Emma, to her credit, though she resists at first, she does see it. Her respect for Mr. Knightley and the fact that she's fundamentally a good person helps her to acknowledge the truth. It's beautiful to see how Emma then takes responsibility for her own behavior and then makes amends. And she's contrite. There's real shame. Now, shame can be dangerous when misapplied or overused, but it can also show us where we need improvement and remind us to do right. And no one needs to be clued into this more than the powerful hero. Well, anyone with power, hero or not. Emma tells Mr. Knightley, I seem to have been doomed to blindness. My blindness to what was going on led me to act by them in a way that I must always be ashamed of. But this is the way of the true heroine. It is not just about conquering monsters out there in the world. She must be brave enough to look within herself and be honest about what she sees. And Emma is motivated to discover these things and become her best self because she has what all of Jane Austen's heroines have, an affectionate heart. She cares about her loved ones deeply, and she wants to be the best version of herself. She values honesty and integrity, and this makes a Jane Austen heroine so much more superior than the many strange caricatures of heroines we are seeing today. These heroes too often whine and fuss and only care about being seen as the hero. They're like Mrs. Elton. See me, I'm so great. Yes, we see you. You're actually annoying. The ending is great. In the true classical comedy genre style, everyone gets what they want and ends up right where they should be. Emma ends up discovering that she's been in love with Mr. Knightley all along. She not only couldn't see what was going on with everybody else, but she was a little slow on the uptake with herself. And then she takes responsibility for Harriet. She coordinates a trip for Harriet to visit her sister for a type of distraction. And this is good use of ingenuity and a thoughtful resolution to the problem that Emma created herself by leading the impressionable young Harriet astray. She does it maybe partially to alleviate guilt, but she also appears to do it because she believes it will help Harriet. And it ends up leading Harriet to happiness, as that is where she is reunited with Mr. Martin, who she wanted to be with in the first place. It's also lovely that Jane Fairfax ends up with Frank Churchill, who, like Emma, is contrite and shows that he will likely be a better person in his future with Jane. I'm going to leave this video here. There's so much more to the novel, but this will have to do for today. I'll be doing more Jane Austen videos in the future, but what other kind of stories are people interested in? Thanks for watching. See you next time.